it's over, man. So thanks. I'm glad you missed the first part of that.
No, I was
Holy shit.
That was coming. I was so waiting for just before that.
Oh, damn it.
Boom. But no.
That's right.
Okay.
Now no
Got a
one's going to believe
sixth
it.
sense for that sort of thing.
I don't know whether to give context for this or not. I think
No.
I'll skip it.
There's
Let's
no
go
reason
straight
for
into
context.
Welcome to the Dresden Files podcast, where we start at inappropriate times in the middle of sentences. We're here today to talk about part 2 of our review of Turncoat.
Part 2 of 5.
Part 2 of hopefully not.
Yeah, this is just the text part. Then we get into the meta-analysis later.
And
Right.
we're getting to the Marxist reading of the Dresden Files, Turncoat. What does that mean for the Lumpen role today? More importantly today, talking about news. We know as of Tax Day, April 15th, that we're up to chapter 58 in the next book. Peace Talks. Hurrah, hurrah. Any other news?
Ben, are you bucking for director? That was like the smoothest intro we've had for like ever.
Considering his last few intros, he's really needed to.
I've had a lot of practice of failure, like you were talking about.
Right. Well, and considering the Neo level dodge that I just performed. So anyway. Sure.
The world will never know.
All right.
Anyway.
I can't think of any other news. So I guess we should just get into it, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had to split this book up in the first place.
Right. Well, I mean, part of that is just me. I mean, I hated the fact that we didn't split up Deadbeat, and I just didn't want to do it again to Turncoat because it's like secretly my favorite. Every time I try and say it's not my favorite, it is. So
every book gets longer and longer and longer. So, God, I hope we don't need to go to a part 3, but we might have to.
Priscelli has absolutely confirmed that Peace Talks will be the longest book.
Yeah, we're at the highest chapter count, I think, at this point. But she said this comment of there's still so much left that needs to happen.
Because everything happens in Peace Talks.
70 chapter book, there it goes.
Yep. I told you. Told y'all. So, speaking of Turncoat, we left off at the Wraith House after Shagnasty basically went and redecorated the whole place and a whole bunch of mortal goons and a couple of the sisters.
Yes, we are starting at chapter 28.
Right. So, because we've totally been giving you a chapter by chapter, blow by blow. So, but basically, if I remember right, it's a little bit of, the tense standoff afterwards where Laura and Harry are quibbling about who's going to eat who. And she realizes that Harry's not protected anymore. And he demands a car and some other nonsense. What am I missing?
He demands a car. He picks up Anastasia at the infirmary and talks to Justine. And Justine is doped up and says a few more words than she should. So Lucio has too much of a clue. And then as they're getting into the car, Lara is able to see that he's not protected anymore because of their intimacy. Right.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the fun line there with the whole Justine thing is like, Thomas knows, that is a huge pain in my ass, so just hilarious stuff like that. But yeah, Lucio and Justine being doped up, but Lucio's still too smart. So she figures shit out. Laura figures shit out. It's good times. And honestly, I mean, we still haven't really seen that come home to roost, which is part of why I'm like, that'll be a fun thing.
I wonder if part of it was just Jim kind of clearing the air to allow for some character stuff there that he hadn't before. He did the same thing. He does the same thing with Thomas in this book, trying to cut away some of the character development to create new space for the character to move. He does the next. That's what Changes is all about. All of the tropes of the series get completely torn down to create kind of a new way of telling stories after Changes. So I wonder if that's just kind of he's just planting the seed. I don't know that I don't know if he has any plans for it in particular. Unless do you guys think he has any particular plans for that already?
Oh yeah. I mean, part of it could have been like a hint that, it's just a hint that Lucio isn't really in love with Harry, or that connection isn't there, because that's something that I think gets brought up later in the book, right? Is that he should have known and blah, blah, blah. But, like definitely, like it was such a huge part of the relationship between Laura and Harry that he had leverage on her as much because she couldn't do anything to him on that level. And now that she can, like, he really could be influenced. Like, we knew as readers that Harry, despite everybody being like, oh, Thomas is using you and all this other stuff, and they're in your head and whatever, we knew they couldn't be. And now everybody knows that's not true. And so, I mean, maybe nothing comes of it. It could just be like he's still protected some other way. But, it also becomes important with, it comes up again with, why the hell can't I remember her name? Madrigal's sister.
Madeline.
Right? Madeline. Yeah. Because she kisses him and he's like, oh, shit. Like when he gets his faculties back. But, yeah. So, I mean, it's at least that important in the book. But I'm definitely waiting for the day that Laura corners him again. And, like, she's been after him for a real long time, since Blood Rights. So.
Well, I think as if Peace talks with how the ending of Skin Game was working his relationship with Murphy, he might be protected quickly again.
They're going to bang that quickly?
Oh, yeah. Come on, it's Murphy. Come on.
Well, just in time for her to die in Peace Talks. And,
that's fine. But she's not going to, so I don't know.
What? Yeah. Well, you'll know it's doomed with Murphy if we get like the entire relationship happens in Side Jobs, right? Because like I keep thinking that about Lucio. It's like poor Lucio, like they get together, they go on a date, that they've kind of been an item. But like if you think about it, all of their relationship and everything happened
in Day Off.
Yeah, like it. Well, and I think there's a couple other references because or maybe
at the end of Small Favor, they hook up for the first time. They go on they go for a bocce or whatever, and
right, because
Harry talks about how he restores his soul.
Well, and they talk about Demon Reach there, and then, but I'm thinking like they talked about like their first date was horseback riding or some nonsense, or I don't know, maybe that is Day Off that I'm thinking, but
it might be because I think they were trying to go away. I think.
Gotcha.
It's been a while since I read that story.
Right.
No, day off. It was just he had nothing to do, so they were going to go out and do things. They weren't going on a vacation or anything. They were just going out for the day.
Gotcha. All right. So the Laura thing, I totally think is coming back, but that's just my vote. So.
I mean, Harry's got a good general. He's always from the beginning. He's had at least a very good resistance to the sort of passive White Court mojo. They come into the room and everyone gets distracted, and he does too, but he kind of snaps out of it pretty quick by comparison. It's just the direct touch is obviously a little more,
right.
Personal. But we'll see.
Right. So on their way to the next place, like he and Lucio talk about Margaret a little bit, right? That happens here.
Because figures out about Thomas, and they talk about Margaret and what she was trying to do and why she was so much of a pain in the ass.
Right.
Yeah, because of the fact that the council doesn't really get involved in human politics, going back to the conversation with Listens to Wind earlier and all that stuff, getting more detail on what their involvement is in world affairs or lack of.
Yeah, and why they stick to the laws of magic as they are, which at least severely limits someone from being truly evil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was just, it's a fun conversation, because she's like, Margaret, you bitch, and it's like, my mom, you were talking about my mom. Also, you knew my mom.
Yeah. How the hell did you know my mom? It's like, well, she was the big bad for a while.
I was going to say, that's a little, you want to talk about Harry not cluing in on things. I mean, the captain of the Wardens, you don't think there's at least a passing knowledge of his mother, who at this point he already knows is not exactly a clean cut type of person.
Right. Yeah. I'm going to quibble with your whole, she was the big bad, because no way.
She wasn't Kemmler. But
no, but she was Harry before Harry.
Exactly, yeah. She was the warden.
She was a big pain in the ass. Yeah. She was the budding warlock, maybe, or something like that, I get.
Well, they talk about it in this conversation as she was being watched by the wardens.
Yeah, and she broke the first law at least once.
She did?
Yeah,
I didn't catch
they
that.
confirmed that either in this book or maybe it was Blood Rights, but I thought it might have been in this conversation She broke the first law at least once, and probably others, but she at least like kind of danced on that borderline.
Danced around them.
Yeah, I remember the dancing part, and that she kept like slipping away into the Never Never, and that's part of how she got like the LaFay honorific. But interesting, because I mean, first law is thou shalt not kill, right? So that means she totally. And I'm like, who did she off then? So,
yeah, super interesting.
Right. So that's why I'm like, well, I've got so many extra follow-up questions and I don't remember that at all. So yeah, okay. All right, so they ended up going to the hospital from there, right?
There was that scene with Bob and trying to track.
Yeah, they go back to Harry's place, and he goes into the lab, tries to do tracking spells, and none of them work.
Right, because obviously
it's kind of just a setup for how he's going to handle both Binder and Shag Nasty later in the book, even though he's talking about Shag Nasty. They're expecting the magic stuff, so he's going to eventually figure out to try something else entirely.
And then Harry interrupts everything. He's like, I've got gender issues, man.
Great.
Yeah.
Well,
Bob's great line about, why do you look at naked women if you don't have a gender? It's an aesthetic choice.
But that does genuinely contradict what he said in Deadbeat. It's like, no, I am a he. I'm definitely a he. So he is choosing his gender at least there.
Right.
Sure.
Well, and I mean, it's pretty established that Bob is probably a pervert because he got picked up by a teenager. So, like that's what it is. It's like, guess what Harry was probably still doing in his teen years, at least, Bob started out with dirty magazines, and then Harry's like, nah, I can't buy you that shit anymore. Here's some romance novels. I don't know. So yeah, because to rewind just a little bit. So I think the low magic way that he approaches the end game, right, gets set up in a couple of ways, because we've already dealt with Vince, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he already has him in his back pocket, and he's already been, low key followed himself. He realizes the magical approach isn't going to work against the Nagloshi, because guess what? The Nagloshi's way better at magic than you are. Yeah. And so then this is one of the times where, I feel like you don't really get any of his plan. It just kind of happens behind the scenes, and then it all gets revealed later, right? So that's how TV tropes it's going to work. But that's where he starts to put this thing together, that he's going to leverage them against each other, and he's going to out them. And then if he gets enough of the senior council and high-level wardens involved, maybe they got a shot at, making this happen. But at the very least, expose the guy and then see what happens, because there is, I mean, he's quoting the fucking Wile E. Coyote. So he knows there's a really good chance this is going to blow up in his face. Like, he has to know that, so...
Yeah, and this whole gimmick, of course, appears again in Skin Game with the whole the long con that Harry pulls the entire book, where there's certain things set up, certain things skipped, and you don't really notice till it's revealed and it pays off without the reader ever really being made explicitly aware. Here, there's a few little hints that he's setting something up, because he sends Mouse away, and you forget about it unless you're an attentive reader. I'm not. And then, of course, you find out what Mouse was doing the whole time. So,
see, and I don't remember that, but what I do remember is the whole game over, and then the entire chapter of this is what I set up.
Oh, well, sure. I skipped back from Skin Game to the current book. In Turncoat, he sends Mouse away.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right. And you don't find out why or how until later.
Well, and it's a good thing you brought that up, because I did not notice that. I noticed that he was at the council meeting, but I didn't realize. Yeah, because he does talk about it, right? That they had Mouse there to identify he was a witness, and then Ancient Mai totally vouching for him.
Which is the first time,
right?
But because Mouse got injured, he wouldn't be safe to take into the big battle, and he can identify someone.
And he's not there at the island. Because if he were at the island, Ancient Mai would have recognized him then. Mm-hmm. So having Mouse away from that whole thing really allows a bigger space for the other characters to pop in. Toot Toot hadn't been doing basically anything the whole book. Here's a great moment here. Billy and Georgia have their revenge. Binder and Harry have a little heart-to-heart. And so not having Mouse there, he gets to step back and then come back for later part in a very satisfying way, where
Right.
Ancient Mai realizes, you have a food hawk? How did you get that?
Right. Totally skipped ahead, but yeah, I follow
Yeah.
you. That's
Yeah.
good. So
That is definitely skipping ahead. Let's see here.
So
There is
after-
a nice little scene in the same chapter with Molly. That sets up the anti-romance that he and her have, which is another recurring thing between masters and apprentices. This book. If you guys want to write any thoughts about that,
you're the one with the anti-romance. Take it.
well, the whole thing where he won't give Molly an inch, and she still definitely pines for him to some degree, and that becomes the master, the kind of tenuous master apprentice relationship, and that's unrequited, which is of course Morgan's whole issue, Morgan's whole beef later when it's revealed that Anastasia is acting against her character by being happy with somebody.
You mean Stacy?
Right. So I know it's like poetry. It rhymes. If you've ever heard that before. Okay, never mind.
Is that a Marxist thing that you picked up on?
No, it's George Lucas. So let's see. In the next chapter, then he goes to the hospital with Billy and Georgia.
Right. And the big takeaway for me there is like this is kind of the moment where it's like Harry decides to bring them into the fold, right? Except he doesn't, because Billy's like, you can't fucking do this to us anymore. Which I thought was kind of interesting, because I think we talked about that last episode where it's like, this is the book where Harry really decides to bring them in and keep them up to speed. And it's like, no, Billy straight up demanded it. He's like, we're not going to help you blind anymore.
Yeah.
You've got to let us know.
Technically, Dresden could just choose not to tell them anything, not to get them involved anymore. But he's asking to get them involved. And then when he started on, I'm not going to tell you things for your safety, Billy becomes Will and says no.
Right. And that's a good way of putting that too. Definitely, Billy becomes William, so there's some cute moments there. I mean, unfortunately, you find out for sure Kirby's passed, and I think they find out that Andy will make it, right? Like she's still kind of on the fence, but they're hopeful. So
I think at this point they're saying if she makes it through the night, she'd be more certain.
Right.
And then she gets a fate worse than death later on in life. So they should have just let her die.
So from here, I don't remember if there's anything else important here, but we go to Binder's interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is fun.
Yes, super great bad cop moment, because it's like, because he's, Murphy's in there doing the cop thing, and she's being heavy and hard with him and everything like that, and he's just trying to wait her out because he's a professional criminal. Like, he knows that she can't do anything, and he knows all this, and he's all proper and British and whatever, and then he's like, oh, Harry, you're here to good cop me, right? And Harry just beats the shit out of him, and it's fantastic because it's like, no, she's the good cop. You thought you had a bad time before. Like, damn well that the wardens have a reputation for being harder than the police, that they don't answer to mortal law. Like, so you probably should have played ball with her, and then you'd be fine by now.
Yeah, and the theater that they do with Rollins over the intercom, it's like, there's a camera watching. It's like, yeah, move a little bit to the left and let me get popcorn.
Right. Which I mean, in the real world, I'm like, oh God, like, how did they get away with that? Or at least I hope they can't get away with that in real life. But it's such a great moment.
Equipment malfunctions all the time.
Right. Yeah, shit breaks around Harry, right? So
that too.
Yeah, so you get that. You get the whole him eating the sandwich because they've been starving Binder for like 6 hours. And then, and Binder's kind of heavy. So, if he went 6 minutes without a candy bar, is probably a real long time for him.
Hey.
Sorry if that was personal. Yeah. And then this is a great dry run for Harry's lo-fi, tracking, right? He gives Vince his first job, and basically he's like, okay, this is how I would do it, right? Harry puts himself in Binder's shoes, I would imagine. Thinks his way through how he's going to shake the tracking, because part of it is like while they're roughing him up, they get hair or blood.
Yeah. Murphy grabs him by his short hair, smashes his face into the table, and then lets him go. But she has a fistful of hair as well.
Right. So they use hair to track him, but then he jumps into a river. He goes to a hotel, shaves, showers, whatever. But by then, Vince, was able to pick up the tail, which is what I thought was great about the whole thing. Is like Harry tracked him, however far magically, told Vince like, okay, he's going to be here at this time. And then, like Vince picked it up from there. And then just Vince's whole attitude, like, it's just great to see somebody give Dresden shit for once, So he's like, okay, what's he doing now? And he's like, hold, please, click.
And Murphy, it's like, I love it when the guy who knows what's going on doesn't tell you anything.
Right.
And Rollins' method of saying, it's like, I'm not so young anymore. I like this ability of tracking criminals from afar.
Right. So they tracked Vince back to a hotel, or not Vince, they tracked Binder back to a hotel, and he met up with Madeline, who had just finished up killing off a loose end. So, yeah, so the guy who she manipulated into planting the money in Morgan's account, basically to frame him. So
we kind of did skip over a little bit about Vince's past, if you want to go over it.
That he was a cop?
Well, he was a cop, became private because he was going to be forced to transfer to SI after he found a guy that it was a city councilman that liked to beat on his women.
Right.
Yeah. And then he went private and now owns a Mercedes.
Right. Yeah, so you've got...
no justice.
Yeah. Yeah, you got Rollins and Murphy being like, wait, what? I'm in the wrong line of work. So...
All right. Yeah, back to Madeline.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, she killed the guy, and the way that I always took the pretense of her conversation, it's like, oh, it's a shame you weren't here 5 minutes earlier, is that she would have taken care of Binder as well. So they basically kind of talk about the whole thing, and then Harry is able to get in and hear this entire conversation because he uses Silly String as thaumaturgical focus, so it's just another one of those, kind of like what he did with the Play-Doh and everything, which I thought was always awesome. So, except that he's gonna have to clean his ears for like a week after that. But...
He's a professional. Don't worry about it.
Right, he's probably got a magic spell to do it.
That's just the line he says. And then another he listens to the conversation. Binder shows off that he's smarter than you'd wish he were. With just burn him out. That's literally what happens in Changes. It's great.
Oh, right. Yeah, just the whole how would you deal with him? And it's like, oh, I just burn his house down. So
why would he be at his house? Oh, you don't understand. Money never understands. He's poor.
Yeah, he doesn't have a bunch of mansions he can go hide out in. Like,
he hasn't had 100 years of accumulated interest.
Right.
Yeah. Madeline is obviously powerful as much as she can be as being a white court vampire, but Binder is not that much powerful as a wizard goes. So everything that he's accomplished is because he's practical.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, Binder, yeah, that's exactly right. Like, I mean, in a way, Binder he's kind of like the mid-level thug because he's got a crew. His crew just happens to be magical, right? So he's your sergeant, your lieutenant type, mostly in the sense because he already has a crew of like 30 dudes he can call up, literally whistle up out of nowhere and get things done. So he's a little smart. He's a little what's the why can't I think of the word?
Clever, canny, savvy.
I mean, all of those things. I was thinking something else, but yeah, it's just kind of interesting. Cunning is, I think cunning was the word, one of the words. But yeah, and it's part of why he's a great character, I think, and he's just enough of a weasel to get out of it all at the end. So, of course, we'll see him again. Spoiler alert,
Hopefully many times, but we do see him just the one so far.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So from here, they go back to the apartment.
Yeah.
I believe.
So Binder ends a conversation with Madeline and her saying that she called in the tip to the wardens that Dustin had Morgan and it was hoarding him in Chicago. And she expects that they'll show up within an hour to like storm his place and get everything. And then in a conversation in the car, Murphy points out no one's going to believe her if she identified herself.
Right.
And if it's anonymous, then the power of bureaucracy is going to take a few hours to get to that point. and bureaucracy is necessary but slow.
Right. And and Harry kind of gets a little bit more hope, makes some more arrangements, and then fucking calls the wardens himself, which is like, dude, it's one of the best scenes in the book. Like, all I wrote, like, I wanted to read it, but I was like, all I wrote here was like, get this verbatim. It's like, go ahead, sir. And just the whole like, would you like me to read that back to you? And he's like, yes, please. And because he's so polite after that. And then like the whole scene is just everybody in the background, like losing their fucking mind, because it's like, please let the senior counsel know that I have been, harboring Morgan. He is at my apartment. I am ready to kick all of your asses, and you can meet me here at this time.
And the biggest difference is he identified himself.
Right.
Because an anonymous tip is just another one of the many crazies or weird people.
Right. Well, and he's got his call sign, right? So they had their sign off and everything like that. So they know he's at least a warden with the proper sign off and everything. And then, there was no reason to doubt him at that point. But I was like, yes, come and get him, please. So.
But after the conversation in the rolls, they go back to Harry's apartment and find the third weird tableau.
Oh, right. Yes.
Ah, yes. Glorious
What's wrong with you people? Why don't you use your words?
Morgan, I swear to God, just.
Yeah.
But basically this time it was Morgan, I think, had his sword at Molly's throat.
No, this time he had a gun, of which,
was it?
How the hell did he hide?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Don't ask too many questions, but because he shot Mouse. And then, he was accusing Molly of getting in Lucio's head. Spoiler alert, she totally did. And Harry makes Molly help cut the bullet out of Mouse and sew him up and everything like that, which is great because Mouse is totally playing it on. And, Harry afterwards is like, dude, you got hit by a bus and didn't make that much of a whine. Like, what the hell?
Yeah. I think the line was that he got run over by a van and then he returned the favor.
Right. Yeah. So like, were you trying to make that more for her so she'd learn something? So just another great moment with Mouse. Smart ass dog.
Yeah. And they have that conversation, Harry and Molly, about how do you know when you're doing something wrong and you're trying to justify. It's like you're always starting questions or statements of I wouldn't do this, but.
Right.
And she takes the lesson, but she ends it with saying, I know what I did was wrong, but I swear she's been messed with.
Right. Which is great too.
Has she even learned? Probably not. I don't think so.
I mean, it starts to become, it's the classic conundrum. Do the ends justify the means, right? Like in her case, in this case, yes. Like that's what she's saying is like, because it was the only way I could find out. So I had to do it, even though it was wrong and broken and, all that. But
and she provides the idea for Harry to know what's going on with the ink, right? She provides that. She says, you don't have to really control somebody. You just have to nudge them your direction. How you know what they do. And then heartbroken almost, she says, it's what I would do.
Yeah.
Right.
Damn.
And it also shows how cunning she's getting with all of this when she breaks down all of the reasons to be suspicious of Lucio and why she was there.
Well, and Harry even says so much in his internal dialogue, right? That he hasn't appreciated it up to this point, but he now realizes that Molly is going to be one scary, powerful person, like
in 2 books.
Well, yeah, but he says it here, right? So,
yes.
But yeah. And that's, definitely. Like, obviously, she's kind of busy at the moment with other things. She's kind of on tilt, but like, wait till she solidifies her power base as like, Winter Lady. And she's going to be a force. So
this is one of those character moments that ties in basically everything we know about the character up to this point. I'm thinking the stained glass windows. I think the kind of rebel attitude, the kind of the search for power, the doing things even though they're wrong, all the way up to this point, and even the romance, the anti-romance thing that she has with Harry, and it's just another little step that shows, I think, a very coherent meta-narrative for her character, of her character arc over all of these books, which is, I think, is extremely well done. That's something we're lacking in some other characters, and arguably Butters, where it's just kind of one thing and then another upgrade. It's not quite as satisfyingly told or managed as it is here.
Butters doesn't have as much tragedy, I'll say.
Yeah, that definitely helps. Yeah.
Yeah.
One
Yes.
thing. Oh no, Andy's gonna
Butters
die.
didn't have anything to lose yet, right? So,
That's a good point. Well, maybe everything happens in Peace Talks.
right.
One thing in her thing though too about how she would do this, I think it tracks to how the people in the White Council have been manipulated by Peabody, because she says, "I would make them more political." There's Merlin. I would make them more prone to fight. There's Morgan.
Ebenezer.
I would make, and there's or more. Yeah, either one of those. And there's a third one. Or make them dwell on mistakes, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
That tried perfectly with Injun Joe.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's got to be explicitly tied in, or it fits because it fits so well to some of the motivations we're guessing at, especially for Injun Joe, on how Peabody's been influencing and how we've seen them throughout this book. We've already seen all of these characters in their native element. We saw the political Merlin way earlier in the book. We saw the Injun Joe, who's kind of moody and depressive and a little bit cynical, and we've already seen this. So this is the major hint to how these characters have been influenced. And even after we were just told about bureaucramancy again recently, I think I'd be surprised if there weren't some people who figured out the twist just by being very attentive readers, because this is a very good hint for attentive readers.
I have
Sure.
to say, this book makes me feel better about my job in the bureaucramancy sector. Like Lucio says it, Murphy says it. I was starting to hear Ebenezer's voice saying "invaluable paper pushing twin." It's just made me feel so much better.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and the skip ahead just a teeny bit with the listens to win thing. Like, I think you see that both sides with him specifically, right? He realizes how he's been manipulated, and that perhaps his tragedy was a little highlighted and overly cautious. And I think that's a big part of how he flips at the end.
Absolutely.
Because he goes from somebody's got to pay and it's going to have to be Morgan in this case to, I think we've killed enough people. I think we've done enough harm. And he starts to realize, and I feel like he flips 180 degrees the other way, but in a good way, right? Like, he's always been one of the good guys. He's even trying to make this decision because he thinks that it's right. But he flips against his own word just because he knows he's been had, and he is being pushed, and I feel like he kind of rebels against that even harder.
Arguably, it's because I don't think, because he doesn't even know he's manipulated for sure yet. Arguably, it could be just because he's outside of Peabody's direct influence for the first time in probably a while. He's probably been maybe he was healing folks at when they got killed by all those people in broad daylight, but he's been involved probably in the council and probably under the direct influence of Peabody for a long time. He gets out; it's a breath of fresh air. He fights.
Right.
He fights Shagnast. He gets a little bit of his old self back.
Right.
That's possible.
And what's really interesting to me, and it's kind of getting muddled in here, but like Harry talks about how Peabody's probably been doing this for years, right? And at least since the war broke out. But I mean, Peabody has been around a real fucking long time. Like, he could have set this up a long time ago. And that was always just something that's interesting, is like, I feel like Jim wrote it out to be like, oh, he's been doing this since around the war broke out sometime. So they've got to look back on years worth of, decisions. And it's like, no, I mean, in their lifespans and how long Peabody's been around, decades, I wouldn't be surprised that he's at least pushed them a little bit, unless, his form of magic would be easy to catch if they weren't distracted by the war. There would have to be some other mitigating circumstance why he wouldn't have done it earlier, because it's so subtle they just never caught it.
Based on the conversation at the end with Rashid, it seems like if you're not looking for it, and even if you are, you may not be able to find it.
Right.
So if all he was doing for someone who's as old as the senior council is just highlighting or priming them for something that they're already leaning towards anyway, it's easy to predict what they're going to do and therefore counter it. That's all he might need to do in order to set them up into a position that they get hurt really badly, like he did, like the Battle of Sicily and things like that.
Well, that is a bureaucracy. He's directly, even by just showing a paper in front of somebody, you're presenting them with ideas they hadn't considered. And it's
even simple, like non-magical priming can happen to people, and then all he does is make it stick a little bit harder.
Absolutely, and we see another turnaround too with, while we're on the subject of Merlin in the next book in Changes. He's ready to throw down. He is leading the fight. He's not just throwing up a ward and running away and kind of doing what is minimally necessary. He is charging into battle. He is ready to throw down. Yeah, almost
that was the sharpest personality change we saw in the time that we've had.
It doesn't happen in this book, which is a little bit frustrating. Well, we see it at all, and so I think it really shows the depth of Peabody's influence in wizarding politics, which is already fascinating and wonderful, and probably the best part of the world building for me.
Right, and that's a really good point. I had never taken Langtry's flip to be the result of getting free of Peabody's thing. I had taken it to the point where it's like even the Merlin can only be pushed so far, and to finally come to Edinburgh and make these demands and whatever, he's like, I'm gonna kick that bitch all the way to the moon. I swear to God, So
sure, that might certainly help, but after many books of either Harry and Ebenezer talking about why are we so defensive and we're not actually taking the offense when we need to, and that would probably, since it was strangling the council, and now that force is gone, he can actually be aggressive.
No, yeah, I like it. So is there anything that happens before he gets to the island to start setting up?
I mean, there's the calls. He doesn't make the calls at that point, does he?
He does, right? So we talked about him calling the wardens. He calls the White Court. He calls Shagnasty, right? Because he starts making demands and being Harry Dresden, and it's like, do you think for an instant I won't kill your brother? Blah blah blah, and all this other stuff, and he just fucking hangs up on him and hopes really, really, really hard that he didn't just kill Thomas. By being a smart ass. So
point of clarity though, Shagnasty did not know Thomas is his brother.
Well, whatever. Yeah.
It looks like the ritual does happen before the calls. I mean, I'm looking at the book here. I might have gotten that wrong. So there's the major ritual, the bit of banter on the boat all the way to Demon Reach before it's named, and the evil island, and he goes up. Skyclad has that great the great summoning fight scene, sort of.
Well, but even before that, right? So when he no. The Vaterung thing happens later. Okay. So yeah, he goes to claim the island as a sanctum, right? The sanctum invocation, is that what they called it? Or am I mixing other arcane words? Okay.
Hold on. As they get on the boat, Molly says, do I have to ask for permission or something? He says, why would you? They do that on Star Trek?
Right.
Just like she always goes to Star Trek.
Yeah, that's a nice detail. Which comes up again nicely in Ghost Story, of course.
Yeah.
So wonderful. That's my favorite part of Ghost Story.
It's a post-geek world, Harry. You can like both. So yeah. So yeah, she asks permission to come up to the bridge. They go out there. He has a fight. You're super excited about this fight. So take us through it. No, Ben.
Oh yeah, I love this. Well, it's the Sanctum Invocation is just a nice little bit of ritual setup stuff. In a lot of the other books, when we have had it, it's been maybe one or two scenes earlier on. Here, we've already had his conversation with Bob, and then entirely separate, he just does the ritual and he explains it as he does it, kind of as narratively. And I don't know that there is 2/3 of the way into a book before we get such a great bit of magical prep scene in this series. Usually at this point, it's a little bit more action, a little bit more investigation. But 2/3 of the way through the book, we get this fantastic, almost one of the first of 3 climaxes, I'd say, that the book has to offer. With, of course, the second one being the action climax, and the third being the courtroom drama.
Right.
And this is just setting the tone for some fantastic stuff on the island, and the power that Harry has locally here to answer various, be aware of certain presences and so on.
Right. So he takes the island. He basically, they go through the 4 elements, if I recall correctly. You know, they do earth, wind, fire.
All the while, Demon Reach is trying to do the equivalent of a phone going off next to your ear.
Yeah.
Right.
Nice. Good. I got that reference.
And then Harry, does claim the place is a sanctum, right? So he starts to realize that he's got all sorts of crazy knowledge that he shouldn't have. You know, it's fairly mundane, but like he knows, where to walk, where not to walk, kind of like what he did in Small Favor. And he goes to talk it over to the other, senior wizard who's there. So he talks to Morgan a little bit, and like Morgan's like, well, what about this? What about that? He's like, holy shit, I totally didn't even think of that. So they start to explore this power. Like he realizes it's constrained to the island. If he wants to know how many beehives and where they are, he can know that information. If he wants to know where the deer are, he knows that information. But if he wants to know who's going to win the next, World Series, he does not have that information, so.
Didn't he also ask a calculus question or something? And nothing.
I know he uses it as an analogy. I don't remember if he actually asked it, right? Because he says that, shit, I can't even remember it's because it's not omniscience, right? It's, I forget the word he uses now.
The being with intellectus has to be focused on something via consideration in order to know it, whereas an omniscient being knows all things at all times. So he can only think of what the answer is once he thinks of the question. It might be instant, but he has to think of the question first.
Right. So with the calculus example, he doesn't know calculus. He just knows the answer. He's got no reason to have the mechanism of calculus. And then the other thing that he talks about with intellectus that I thought was a little bit foreshadowing for changes is that, creatures with intellectus can still be snuck up on because they don't even have the wherewithal to think, is somebody hiding in that shadow? They just either know it or don't, right? So knowing the right question is as important as anything, for having intellectus. So,
but it's still a super awesome thing. It sounds super limited, but it's used so well in just this book alone. It's fantastic.
Right, which is the best kind of tool to give a character.
Exactly. Let's sort of like if Aquaman wasn't basically just underwater Superman, but all he could do was talk to fish, and that's all he could do. If you manage to use that in interesting ways, it's one of the most rewarding ways to tell a story.
Like talking to Cthulhu. So,
well, I don't know about that. Yeah, there's. It also sets up some of the things. I don't know that I guess we did see some of it. I believe we saw some of it in previous book, but the buildings there made of stone, the circle, even the fire that starts, all of this kind of gets used again later on in this very book. Morgan makes this intellectus thing sound like a big deal despite its limitations appropriately. It's really setting up the epic that's coming.
Right.
And so after that discussion, they go back to Chicago, and Harry sends Molly and Morgan on the boat out into the middle of water again so that they're a bit more safe. And then he starts making calls.
That's when he makes the phone calls. Yeah. Okay.
Starting with Lara.
One of the first things he does, he gets Billy in Georgia, right?
He starts off the section with a phone call to Lara.
Okay.
And it's weird. She's flirting with him threateningly and tells him the information about Aramis and the money.
Right. After he makes the phone calls, was there anything else before he goes back out to the island? Because I guess I really want to talk about that part. So
okay, I will skip through this. He calls Shagnasty after Lara.
Mm-hmm.
He gets Billy in Georgia.
Toot.
He talks to Toot Toot.
Yeah.
And recruits a whole bunch more Zalord's militia.
Right.
For pizza, more pizza. And
gets another promotion, right?
Yeah, it's like if everything goes well, you become a major general. But Toot thinks that a promotion is another kind of pizza.
He explains his plan to Molly. It was the basics of some of his plan.
Right.
Only some.
Yeah.
All right. And then
she makes choking noises. Jim always says that. This should be like a drinking game. Whenever Jim Butcher writes in, makes a little choking noise. Take a sip.
That or like it didn't happen, but it was close. He used that twice in the same paragraph once.
Or he arched a brow. Makes me arch a brow. Oh, and then bam, Rashid.
Yeah, Vatron. Since the director was like, "Wait, what are you talking about?" He's not in this
now I
book.
get it.
Yes. What's funny though is I trolled myself because in my notes I said the little moment with Vatarong, and I'm like, "What the hell, little moment?" Oh, right, because Rashid shows up out of literally thin air
Yep.
and blasts Dresden and everybody. Right when they show back up at the island, knocks everybody out. Dresden barely pulls his shit together because he's like, "You know what'd be really good right now? Sleep." And then he's like, "What the fuck am I thinking?" Like. So he kind of snaps himself out of it, and then they have this little thing, like Rashid's like, don't go for your weapons or whatever, and they have their conversation, like, I can't remember all of it, but like Rashid, like my favorite thing is like Harry's like, shit's going on, right? Because of this, and this, and the other thing, and it's like the Black Council, and Rashid's like, yeah, like a young warlock who's getting allies and causing the little folk to like work against their natures, and teaching werewolves how to use magic. And he starts listing off Dresden shit, and it's like, oh fuck, that's what you guys think Dresden is. It's like I start to see why the Wardens don't like him very much. And like up to this point, even Rashid isn't sure, right? Because, and that's why I like his one-on-ones with Dresden, is because you get a throwback to Summer Night, right, where he gave Dresden the out and said that if you had taken my out, I would have killed you myself, and then you get this one where like he thinks that Dresden might be this dark figure that's running around, but then they have a moment, like.
But even before they get to the discussions of whether Dresden is trustable or not, he says, "I cannot permit you to openly challenge the White Council to battle," and Harry has why. He says, "It's not yet your hour."
Right.
Yep.
Something gigantic hint right there to something forthcoming.
See, and it's funny you say that because now I'm on your page, right? But before that, I thought he was just like, you're not going to die yet. Like today's not your day to die, but it's not his day to
die. I mean, there's part of that, but there's something like, this isn't the battle that you need to be in. So I'm not going to let it happen because you need to make it to the big one.
Shit. Wow.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. It's this mythical epic talk that's it sounds like it's appropriate for the upcoming thing, but it's really pointing to that much larger conflagration, like you said.
The Ragnarok that Vatarong cares about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because this gets back to biblical language. Actually, the idea of the fated hour, or it is not yet my hour, it's not yet my time. And so you have some of this language that's appropriate itself in a literary sense for the big epic thing. And I love it. Rashid knows something Harry doesn't. Again.
Oh yeah.
Oh, he knows.
And Rashid says, basically, I can't tell if you're super devious or actually as dumb as you look. Right. And Harry's just like, dude,
right?
Concussion.
And which Rashid starts laughing like Eldest Gruff, right? Like they have another fantastic laughing fit with two archmages, and then Rashid's like, and then you stuck in the tree, like just the whole thing from Summer Night, So it's a great moment, and then when they settle down again, kind of mirroring the Eldest Gruff thing to me is like, I still can't let you go through with it. Like, you're not going to win. And then Harry steps on the island. He's like, how about now? And he's like, you took the island? Like, you fucking crazy son of a bitch. What did you do?
And whatever weird thing he does with his false eye that has a disguise because he's Vatarong on the gates.
Right. Yeah, so because he looks into the futures and whatnot, it looks into the possibilities, and then at the end of it all, Harry's like, "So you're going to be there, right?" And he's like, "Oh no, like I can't come back to the island. The island remembers." And this is where everybody gets kind of confused, right? Because Dresden thinks of the hiss thump, of the thing, but Rashid didn't cause that. It's just Yeah, I guess it's a hint at the power, of the island and how you would not want to piss that off. So
Yeah, and whatever did he do to piss off the island?
right. The word of Jim is he focused the tank, which is my understanding is it sounds like Rashid took the bait, right? That Rashid focused on the wrong thing. And so the island was like, no, you idiot. And Rashid was running around being an idiot. And that caused an issue, is the way that I've interpreted it. So, EG, I know you've been having some difficulty, it looks like. Do you have something to add there?
Well, it was either Rashid went after the wrong thing, or he essentially made the island lose focus. Like if he was, for instance, someone who once had the island under his control, if he was a warden, he could have, drawn its attention somewhere else to instead of what it's supposed to be doing in its responsibilities.
Gotcha.
Either way, he did something the island doesn't like. He didn't hurt it. He didn't physically do anything to it. The reason it has a limp is because it got a piece of itself carved out by a glacier back in the last ice age.
It's kind of interesting, though, because all of this, basically alludes to what we find out later, that the island has a will of its own, so it's not just a guardian spirit or something like that. It's somewhat sentient. So
in this
and it gets a little more so as time goes on, as Harry gives them influence and names and all that stuff.
Yes, that thing. Harry says the name of Demon Reach, and Rashid is like, what are you saying? He was like, well, I couldn't find a name for it, so I made up my own. And Rashid says, well, it's certainly fitting.
Right.
But it makes me wonder, is it a name he actually thought of before he did the rite and just kept it in handy because he has to name things? Or is it something like he learned it from the island as part of claiming it?
Could be. I could see it being learned as part of the ritual, even if Harry doesn't know it. But
yeah.
I also took it as, part of that whole your sight is coming in mysteriousness, that like he already had some of the intellectus when he was there in Small Favor, even though he hadn't claimed it yet. So there are timey-wimey shenanigans. Like, I know not everything's time travel, but as we see in Cold Days, right, weird shit temporally happens on this island, both the way that the problem presents itself, also the way the island was created. So maybe that's where it stems from, as much as anything, as that the island was created in 4 or 5 dimensions.
Right. And so if it gets the name in one point in time, that name and the knowledge of it might reverberate throughout the other points in time. So he learns it without even realizing he learned it.
Right. Yeah, like he may have come up with it. I mean, it's paradoxical, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so he gave it to himself. So
whatever works.
Yeah, I love that moment. I mean, do we need to cover anything before we get into the fight? Because we're kind of.
I mean, there's the meetup beforehand if you want, but other than that,
well,
not really.
He does say that the ley line wells up from the island and says no more than that.
Yeah, he's like, you are wrong about one thing. The ley line doesn't just pass through here; it originates from here.
Yeah. And then pretty much there's just some prep on the island for the big battle, and then people start to arrive, starting with the senior council.
Which, I mean, we can't gloss over that, because great character moments with Ebenezer. So Bear Bjornsson shows up with his Brute Squad and Ebenezer and Ancient Mai and Injun Joe, right? So they're all there, or Great moment. Ebenezer, of course, talking to them. Ancient Mai coming on hard, like she's the law. She's playing Judge Dredd and everything like that. And Ebenezer's, they go back and forth. Harry's being Harry, kind of poking Ancient Mai a little bit. And she's like, I'll fucking arrest you. We'll figure it out. We've got enough wardens to make this all shit happen. And Ebenezer's like, have you thought of asking him? Because Ebenezer's like, if you go after this boy, I can't help you. Like, I'm not going to help him, because then obviously that's a side, but I can't help you either.
Yeah. There was a moment of Injun Joe basically deliberating as to whether he's siding with Mai or not. And when he decides to, and then Ebenezer says, like, I'm not helping this foolishness.
Right.
Go away.
Yeah, because that's the whole thing where Ancient Mai's like, wait, you would go against the council? And he's like, no, I'm just not going to help the foolishness,
I'm assisting the council by telling you to stop.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Right. And then they get buzzed by a helicopter, kind of while this is all going on, and the Wraiths have arrived. So Laura and a couple of her sisters, right? Mm-hmm. So they show up, and she's totally in on it because they had this conversation earlier. And so she throws Dresden 20 feet or some nonsense. And one of my favorite lines out of the whole series that I didn't catch until the second time, which is touch that boy again. The only thing left to you for your kid to bury is going to be your $500 pair of shoes, because Ebenezer's not in on it. And he is like, I will squish you like this.
And then almost does later.
Right.
Which was a good moment.
So she tears into Dresden verbally and everything like that, and then winks with her off eye, the one that's away from the council, which is a great little moment. And then her and Ancient Mai sparring, because they're not fighting, right? They're using protocol to argue about what's going to happen and who's going to get Morgan and all this other stuff. So sorry. And then this, my second favorite line, Ebenezer, the only thing left to bury you will be your $500 pair of shoes, and Ancient Mai following up with "Ay-ya," because she's like, dude, you can't just, we're talking here and you just threatened to squish her. That's not going to work. So,
well, it's like Dresden with Lucio earlier when they go to Laura's.
Yeah, right.
Same veins.
Right. Consider where you are standing and the fresh plaster and the anti-personnel mines. This is why I want this book of all the books to be a movie. Obviously Deadbeat is up there, but we haven't even seen the fireworks yet, literally fireworks, but we haven't even seen the fireworks yet. And I'm like, oh, dude, this needs to be a movie. This is fantastic.
When this one becomes a miniseries, because it's too long for a movie,
Sure.
It needs to start with the court case, and then they're filling in details as they go. And then that's how you got that bruise, and that's where that bandage came from.
Right.
Sorry. Too much fun.
Yeah. So while Lara and Ancient Mai are having their argument, Dresden starts to realize that people have shown up on the other side of the island, and then he realizes that lots of other things are showing up on the island, and so he kind of interjects and he's like, wait a minute, I fucked up. I know it was going to go bad, but I fucked up because we didn't just piss the guy off. He's come to war. And, he figures that Binder and somebody have shown up somewhere, because he kind of gets the feel for Binder's goons because they're bipedal and whatever. And he already knows somebody who can summon that. And then the other guy is summoning a bunch of critters that the island has never seen before. And so
to be spiders.
Yeah, they turn out to be the spiders from the Never Never. And so he's like, we need to do a truce because he's going to kill all of us, and get out of here. So basically, chaos starts to erupt. The wardens start to follow Dresden off into the darkness, and everybody's leery of him as much as anything. And then Dresden starts giving the Fae their orders, which they're basically running around with Roman candles and shit, shooting at people and setting off the booby traps and whatever to identify the enemies. So this is going on. At some point, Dresden and Lara chase down Madeline and get tagged by an anti-personnel miner. No, it was the concussion grenade, right? So Binder had concussion grenades.
So I think there was Ebenezer, Lara, and Dresden were all on the same point and disagreeing about how to go forward, and that's when Ebenezer almost squishes her.
Right.
And then Lara and Dresden are running off after Madeline.
Right. Yeah, because Dresden basically talks him down, and then, because he's like, I'm not going to let you go with him and all this other stuff. And he had grabbed her with Bigby's crushing hand for you D&D nerds, and Lara was pissed off about it, right? Because she knew that Ebenezer could kill her, and she didn't have a way out of it. And for the White Court, that's as bad an insult as you can have, pretty much. So, so they're running through the woods, and at the last moment, he pushes her out of the way, or she pushed him out of the way of the grenade, right? And then he gets thrown clear, and then Madeline starts to, have her way with him.
I'm not sure if she pushed him out of the way. I think she just happened to be in front of him.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So basically, he gets thrown clear, and now he has a concussion from a concussion grenade on top of his concussion that he's already had. And Lara disappears. Madeline basically literally like straddles him, kisses him on the forehead, and starts to kind of feed on him a little bit and talk about all the crazy things she's going to do to him. And then Lara comes out of nowhere and just like fights Madeline. I mean she starts like smashing her, and then at some point like she starts to do the whole White Court thing and feed on her, and Dresden drags Binder out of there. I forget what they did to Binder. They shot him or some other nonsense, but basically he had to drag him out of there. And it's like, yeah, well, if we didn't get out of there, they were going to eat both of us and her,
Mm-hmm.
Pretty gnarly stuff.
Someone needed to be human.
Yeah,
and
right.
Binder's like, huh?
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, just him not understanding at first, but also the two right, and then the whole like you're gonna leave here, and if I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you. So.
Did you mention the Will and Georgia attacking Madeline?
Right. So
yeah,
they tried to, right?
Yeah, they were just basically annoying her and making her bleed.
Right. So they were harassing her, but then didn't they also kind of like got too close to the shenanigans at the end, didn't they?
I think she managed to attack one of them, and then that's when Lara came out and disabled her entirely, and then they slept off the after effects.
Right.
Slept because they bit her, and they're they got her blood in them, and it made them all horny.
Oh, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like how your explanation for Lara's thing is disabled her when she basically like reached in and started grabbing her ribs like the hard way.
Yep.
Well, she was disabled for seconds, and then entrails started coming out.
Right. Yeah. So
one thing we did kind of brush over too is one of the payoffs that it was just set up with a demon reach invocation, that he's able to run really well through the woods in the dark, that the vampires are just barely able to keep pace because
they're fucking vampires.
Well, because they're vampires, but he's able to set the pace because he's got the intellectus with the island, which is just a wonderful use of that necessary secondary thingamajigger.
Right. And it's a good point. I mean, it's the intellectus coming up, and I mean, it's again his kind of point where he's not so much faster as he just knows the exact perfect place to step every time, so it's all economy of motion as much as anything.
Which gets mentioned here so that it can be brought up in the Shag Nasty showdown, which is wonderful.
Right. Yeah, so they get clear of Lara, and then I'm trying to remember what happens in the interim, but I know that Listens to Win catches up to him.
But after.
Well, that's for the fight. Yeah. So, he runs, he finds it, he runs after the Skinwalker heading up to the shack.
Because he knew that the Skinwalker had Thomas.
That too.
Yeah, because while they're fighting, Shag Nasty had flown in with Thomas, basically, right? Or he felt Shag Nasty arrive with him, I think. Yeah. Because there was something so crazy that it could have only been Shag Nasty, which I find is interesting because we know that the island knows what it is later, so.
Yeah. And he remarks on like, this is something that the island actively detests versus just doesn't like being there.
Right. Fair.
Which we find out later is because even though it's minimum security, it's got, 6 of them in there?
Right.
Already?
Right.
Lucky number 7 could have been him.
Right. Yeah, so you're excited about the demon or the Shag Nasty fight. So do you want to take us through that one?
Yeah. How about it?
Okay. I mean, I remember generalities, right? So I remember that Dresden and Shag Nasty fought with the various elements. I mean, Ben, did you want to get into the details?
Well, the biggest thing was Harry's entirely outclassed, but realizes that Shag Nasty's scared of this place for some reason. So he only has to, keep him away, which is so much easier than actually defeat him. But that because of his intellectus connection with the island, he's able to know exactly where Shagnasty is, despite Shagnasty's best tricks. You know,
yeah, his veil and everything.
and there was just split second where Shagnasty's actually afraid.
Right.
So, which is just a wonderful. That's the biggest thing that I liked out of the fight. Harry gets so completely outclassed quickly after that. Uses the soul fire. Well, that wasn't hardly pitiful at all.
Right.
One of the things that really stuck out in the exchange though is when he gets called a spirit caller, but then also Molly gets called a caller. So I think it's mostly, despite some fan speculation to the contrary, I think it's just a alternate term for wizard.
Yeah.
Right. So rather
Well, I
than
mean,
being
it's like when Ulshavaris, or whatever you pronounce it,
Ulsarvas.
called him, Bakar or Bokar, or like, she
Bokor.
called him a couple different terms
Sure.
for things.
it's
I
just
remember the
an
words.
equivalent term. An
Mhm.
equivalent term. Yeah. With this though, because he has the fires of creation and he doesn't even have faith with which to wield them, how did you get those? And
Right.
it's a nice little bit of world building for kind of the level of the stuff that he's playing with compared to and what Uriel signifies in this universe. Which
Right. And for a fight, it's pretty
Sure.
fantastic, getting some of that information out of there. So you've got some of that, and then I like how it wasn't even necessarily Harry's intention, but it kind of works out the fact in a same way that it did for Papa Wraith, where basically Harry whittles down, the Nagloshi so that somebody else can finish the job, so to speak. And so, when he kind of gets it to the point where Harry's pretty much like tapped out, and Shagnasty's like, well, that was hardly pitiful at all, and then Injun Joe shows up, and the actual greatest line of the whole fucking possibly the series, it's like, Shagnasty mouthing off and like, what do you think you're going to do? You're not what does he call him? So but he basically,
He's not a holy man. He doesn't
Right.
know.
And yeah, right.
right, and he's like, well, I'm not here to
You're
bind
not
or
in the
banish
blessed
you.
way, right?
Yeah, right, the blessed way. Yeah, I was like, I'm not here to bind or banish you. I'm just here to kick your ass up between your ears. There's like, this little one doesn't even know the Dine, and he almost had you.
And don't forget Toot screaming,
Oh, yes.
"Avant, villain!" with his box cutter.
Right.
Yeah, a little sturdy.
Well,
but
there's
then also, just a little bit of trash talking. Shagnasty's hissing, being nasty, and he just, Injun Joe just says, "Mother says you don't belong here.
Right.
Father says you are ugly." But intercut with like the most furious, ineffectual attacks from
Right.
Shagnasty. Oh boy, just
Don't plan to banish or bind you, old ghost. Just gonna kick your ass up between your ears.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I've made this comparison before, but I feel like this. And I'm not really an expert on Native American lore, but
Really?
that the use of Shagnasty as this, in Butcher's words, a Native American nightmare, is so it feels so faithful and authentic in so many of the details, and just the shuffling motions that Injun Joe is described to be making. The wizard listens to win, perhaps, and that is completely. It's all he needs to handle Shagnasty. That Shagnasty's doing what looks almost like a King Arthur, Merlin shape-shifting battle, but it's transposed in this context with shape-shifting, nasty shape-shifting demons. The flavor, the tone of it just seems so richly detailed compared to something like, this is the comparison. They're just misunderstood Animagi in the Harry Potter universe, says J.K. Rowling. Why does anybody care anymore? It's just a cheapening. Where that's a cheapening, this feels a very authentic, even if it's appropriation, a very authentic portrayal.
Right.
And I'd like to hear somebody who actually knows this stuff. Maybe we could do an episode on it to get more details about
If
how this
someone
was portrayed.
who has I wanted to say personal experience with something like this.
Anybody who's gotten attacked by a skinwalker, please.
Yeah.
No, or
actual
expertise.
skinwalker, we'd love to have you on the show. So
Well, and of course that's the wonderful danger. You never want to talk about the skinwalkers because maybe they're listening in.
yeah. So, but I mean, it's what you talk about. So to get a little bit more detail, I mean, what you were talking about, Injun Joe dancing off his evocations, right? Basically, he's like throwing bolts of energy at Injun Joe, and he's basically just doing his little Native American dance. Like you've seen other wizards counter it. You see Peabody do it. Even Dresden does a little bit, I believe, when he shrugs off Vaterung's attack. So he does these warding gestures with his fingers and whatnot, and you catch some of that as it goes. But with Injun Joe, he's just dancing. He's just doing his little chant and his little dances. And then once Shag Nasty realizes he's not just going to be able to break him with some kind of magic, that's when he decides, while he's been slinging bolts, he's getting closer because he's so cunning, and he's going to get in there, and he's gonna break him with his physical form at that point because he knows he can't beat him magically. And Injun Joe is smiling. Like as soon as he lunges for him, Dresden realizes that Injun Joe is smiling, and then the shape-shifting battle goes on, and you have that great countering of when Shag Nasty gets the upper hand, and then he turns into a turtle for the defensive aspects of it, or he attacks him as a snake, and Injun Joe turns into a bear, and just these back and forth kinds of battles until they get. It's like Hawk versus Eagle or something like that towards the end. And then Shag Nasty flees. And Dresden's like, fucking, you could have taken him. You could have kicked his ass, and listens to Wynn saying, yeah, but at what cost? Ultimately.
That's a little bit later. Because Dresden's first reaction is just, wow.
Fair.
As it should be.
Injun Joe is just like, okay, yeah, so the things that are important. Those trees down by the thing that have heavy things on them?
Right. Take the water out.
Can you take the water out? How do I do? Oh.
Just happened.
it's already doing it. Yeah.
It's great. Like Harry has all of this power that he's taken and knows that he doesn't know how to use it, but other people around him who know so much more is just like, think of this thing and then it'll happen.
Well, even just say it because I don't even need to tell him how. Just
because you got to appreciate basically everyone we run into. So, I mean, once he does the Sanctum Invocation, so we find out later Ebenezer knows what the island is because he's writing about it in his journals. The Merlin knows what it is because he's like, well, we got to watch this guy again now. Listens to Wynn knows what it is because Ebenezer's like, well, he knows more than anyone about this kind of connection. The Gatekeeper knows a warden before, and B, he just fucking knows everything. The only one who doesn't really seem to notice is Ancient Mai, who just happens to know that the feng shui is bad on the island.
And I find it interesting they're not trying to tell her.
Well, at that point.
She's kind of the oblivious one. She kind of stays in her suspicious political mode the entire time, like somebody's bad grandmother. Like just a mean old...
She probably is someone's bad grandmother.
Yeah.
I was gonna say she's the old ancient Asian lady. You can't tell her what she doesn't know. She knows everything, whether she knows it or not.
Yeah.
But yeah, so fight wraps up. Everybody's fine.
And then
more or
Harry
less.
remembers about to. It's like, wait, I need to get to the bushes, and he passes out.
Yeah, and they wake up later in his little bubble dome of protective energy.
Attempting.
Yeah, and you need to bring this down, or we will bring it down because Ancient Mai is super tactful, and he's like, "Well,
I don't know how."
Goodbye." Well, not just that, but yeah, like I rigged it to blow if anybody doesn't bring it down with the correct sequence. So, yeah, and Ebenezer's wait, you got that to work? So,
yeah, they're talking shop, and everyone else is like, "Dude, fucking priorities."
Yeah, it's like, whose side are you on, man? So they do.
But at this point,
go ahead.
I was going to say at this point, Listen to Win has basically come over to their way of thinking. It's like, yeah, Morgan's still got to die, but we're not screwing over anybody else. So kick rocks, Mai.
No, and that's a good point, right? Because Ancient Mai starts threatening Dresden and therefore Molly and so on, and Injun Joe is like, look, at the end of the day, the council's going to find that Morgan acted alone, and there's not going to be any more executions. So, and she starts to argue, and he's like, that is final. And it's like, when listens to when puts his foot down, like, you fucking listen, apparently, even if you're Ancient Mai. So,
and it's nice that he opposes, and even later he opposes her again. She gets mad about it when in supporting Ebenezer's point about Harry being an investigator, and he should have some say here. So, yeah, I wonder if she's just a little bit confused about what's going on. You said just one person's going to do it, and you're on board with that. Okay, fine. And now you pull the rug out from me again by saying that he should have say in this setting. What are you even doing? And this is before he even finds out about Peabody being the traitor or how Peabody did it. So at some level, Injun Joe's just a guy who's kind of refound his center and is legitimately interested in some amount of justice, even beyond just pragmatic politics.
I do wonder, with your point earlier, that like going against Shag Nasty, especially in what I assume was a very spiritual way for him, with all the dancing and the shape shifting and making sure that he knows what he's doing and why, that the effects of Peabody wore off a little bit at this point.
Yeah, I wonder, or if it's as simple as getting out, and it probably involves a whole lot of that. It's so convincing on a lot of levels. I don't even know that Jim was even thinking a lot on that level, because
we might be reading into it way too much. Us people with 86 episodes of a podcast.
Well, Jim himself says he doesn't really write like that, but even so, he doesn't write in themes or stuff like that. Even so, that it works this way and in a convincing way, you can read into it without doing any mental gymnastics. I think that's a sign of just good writing. So this is why it's one of the best books, because you have so many of these details you can read into without doing a disservice to what's actually in the text. I think. I don't know. I like this book so much.
Right. So I guess to wrap up the last little bit. So, I mean, basically the council takes, all the wizard people. Lara winds up taking Thomas. There's a little bit, I mean, we glossed over some of it. Shag Nasty was taunting Dresden about how, he did literally unspeakable things to Thomas. And that, Dresden knocked Thomas into the warded building to get him away from Shag Nasty, because the wards on the building were kind of keeping it out, was part of why it didn't like to be there any more than, Demon Reach liked it to be there. After that, I mostly remember the trial. Is there anything we need to cover before?
Once they kick Mai out and they have an actual conversation between Ebenezer and Listens to It and Harry, they talk about the spiders and the fact that Harry got jumped by spiders on his way to Edinburgh. So that means that the bad guy has to be someone at Edinburgh.
Right. Okay. Which is important. Oh, they do. Dresden does make it back to his apartment briefly, because he gets a package.
Also, so a little bit of a conversation between Ebenezer and Harry about why did you go after the vampire when you could have solved everything by finding the bad guy. And Harry does everything except say, he's my brother. Right. Ebenezer says he's a vampire. You can't trust him.
But Thomas is my friend.
Peace talks.
Right. Thomas is my friend. He's a vampire. He's not your friend. Your food.
Right.
He's the spawn of your mother and that bastard. I'm just not going to tell you I know that yet.
Oh, I don't. He doesn't know, does he?
Of course he knows.
Oh, I assume Ebenezer. I mean, I don't know.
I thought it's worded Jim. He doesn't know.
There's like 5. There's like 3 that say. Well, there's actually like 6. There's 3 that say he doesn't know. There's 3 that say he does. He knows too much and he knows everything about him. This, that, and the other thing.
Well, I guess we'll wait. I think I'll wait for the most recent one. When he's working on Peace Talks and he says he doesn't know, I'll just stick with the most recent.
I am of the belief that he knows on an intellectual level. He's simply, quote unquote, in denial on an emotional level and refuses to view Thomas as anything but a monster. And then they'll have some sort of reconciliation, and one of them will die.
Everything's in Peace Talks. We'll find out.
Right. Because he has confirmed that will be ripped off in Peace Talks.
Well, yeah, either way, that's coming up in Peace Talks. One way or another.
All right. So, powering through back to the apartment.
He gets a package of pictures. He shows Molly who the portfolio basically like here's them doing the right stuff walk. So you've got Ebenezer and his brute squad, you've got Ancient Maya and Listens to Wind, and you've got I don't know who that is, which probably should have been a great clue as well. Like again, if you piece this all together, it's like who has Harry interacted with at Edinburgh that Molly doesn't know, even on some reputational level.
But it still has to be someone that we recognize, because of course it is.
Right. Yeah. So it's Peabody. Spoilers again. But basically they go to Edinburgh and Molly comes with, and Dresden just walks around like he owns the place. Mouse is there, yes. Anything we need to cover before we do the trial and the fight?
If we want to discuss the conversation with Ebenezer and the journals.
That's after.
Is it?
No, they talk about the journals because they see what Ebenezer was writing in his own journal about the island, and he trusts Harry, but then again, I trusted Maggie too.
Oh yeah, you're right. And then they talk, and then he tells him what about Peabody, and Ebenezer looks at his hands because he's still got ink on him.
And then the trial.
Well, and Molly gets a snack. It's important because Ebenezer sends a warden to make sure she
gets it. Yeah. Because they were arguing about whether or not she could have the food. And but for me, one of the takeaways in the fact that people still, I feel like, sometimes question that these case files are Dresden writing them down. And that's part of the whole, the flawed narrator part is that Ebenezer says, maybe someday you'll have a few thoughts of your own that you'll want to write down. So that's why I think these are Dresden's journals, and they're, part of that. So
from various QAs I remember watching that Jim basically confirmed that he's just writing all of this down for whoever comes next.
The next generation, whoever comes next, so on and so forth.
Right. Which is why he makes it. Just saying. So anyway.
Yes, they do their
case files in the BAT is live action.
There you go. So Rashid made it. Dresden's totally gonna make it. Anyway, so they go to the trial.
And they lay up all of the bad evidence against Morgan.
Right.
Everything they possibly can. And then the Merlin says, "Do you have anything to say in your defense?"
And he says, "No, I'm totally happy I did it."
Yeah.
And Dresden's like, "I object." And they're like, "Who the fuck are you?" And it's like, "You can't object." I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but Ancient Maya is like, you have no basis and no grounds. And Listens to Wind says, "Shut your mouth, you." Anyway.
And the Merlin politics.
Yes.
Right. And the Merlin's sitting back there, and he's like, "I'll allow it." And
he's like, your history with Morgan's really shady, so understand. We're going to take what you say with a grain of salt.
Unless, of course, it's totally in my favor, and then, of course, it's gospel truth,
And who's Hercule Poirot?
I get the reference either.
He's he's kind of like Sherlock Holmes, and he's I think it's Agatha Christie wrote those books. Murder on the Orient Express. He's that kind of detective where he's like he sees everything.
Oh, and then it's like you and deductions and you did that. Okay, I get it. Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, so Dresden kind of catches them up on the last few days and what he's been up to, and then basically he's laying out his own evidence and how it couldn't have been Morgan and how all of these other crazy factors came up to be, and then the Ancient Maya's like, "Cool story, bro, but that totally doesn't prove anything." And it's like, funny true story. I totally had a private investigator and a witness, there, and so I did all of this to surmise that if I set up this meeting on Demon Reach, that the actual killer wouldn't have any other choice but to respond, and that if he is in Edinburgh, his fastest way is going to be coming through the ways in Chicago. So I had that watched, and here are all the people that came through the ways that day. Oh, look, it's Ebenezer. Oh, look, it's the Brute Squad. Oh, look, it's everybody we know. And fuck you, Peabody. And he just starts to laugh, and he's like, "Really? That's all you've got? You've got my picture? That's your proof?" And he's like,
"Mouse."
Yeah, he's like, "I also got a witness." And Peabody starts laughing again. That's like, "What? You've got a dog?" And HMI's like, "Hold the fuck up. Is that a food dog?"
"You have a food dog. How did you get such a thing, and why were you allowed to keep it?"
Right.
Also, the only ones on the council who aren't surprised when he says Peabody is Ebenezer, who we told, And of course,
Right.
the gatekeeper.
Yeah, and that made me really wonder if the gatekeeper knew or was able to see, why didn't he do something about it?
Well, he probably knew after the fact. Like after Dresden essentially exonerates himself.
No, it's better than that, right? The only wizard that I see less than you, perhaps other than the gatekeeper.
There's that, but he still wouldn't have known Peabody, was he? You know,
Yes, because he can see the future.
but
he knew
he
that Molly
can.
was a warlock. How would he know that Molly is a warlock?
Well, sure, but he didn't do anything this time. He didn't put it, like with proven guilty, he used the hindsight and he pushed Harry in the right direction, but he didn't do anything this time except for say, you're not allowed to kill yourself right now.
Well, because that's it. At that moment, he might not have known it was people. I mean, Harry's laying out all the things that happen, and Rashid's looking at him with the quirked eyebrow, like, "Well, are you the guy?" So he doesn't necessarily know what's going on, who specifically it is.
Right.
Once Harry exonerates himself, then he maybe focuses a little more, and he's like, "Oh, wait, okay."
Maybe, but Rashid literally can't act because he has foresight. And to do anything with that, like how is Rashid? The form of magic is so subtle that they only figure it out after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
So without being prescient, like Rashid is, how would they have figured it out? So therefore, if Rashid got involved using foresight, he would break the space-time continuum, which is his whole shtick. Is that basically he can't act on this knowledge because the only way that he knows, it's how he loopholes in proven guilty. The only way that he knows Molly is because of foresight, and he knows that Molly is necessary in some way that we still don't even fully comprehend, though we've got a big hint, obviously. So he tells Dresden, bad shit's happening in your neighborhood, spoiler alert, all the time. Go do something about it. Whereas Dresden would have otherwise potentially ignored what was going on with Molly and other things would have happened, right? But of course, Rashid knew Peabody. Like just like all of the things line up there for me, right? Rashid's never around the thing any more than Dresden is, so neither of them could be brain whammied, just like everybody else of importance was, except for maybe Morgan. And I mean that's the more important thing. How did Morgan escape it, or if he didn't, like, was that why Morgan went after Dresden?
Obviously, he got whammied, right? Because he woke up in LaFortier's office. But
no, he didn't.
Yeah, he woke up there.
No.
Yes, he did. He woke up and saw that Anastasia
entered office, right? Like
Morgan told me that he woke up in LaFortier's room. Lucio was holding the murder weapon.
Yeah. And he confirmed that with Morgan. It's like when you woke up, she was the one who was killing him. And Morgan continued, like she didn't know what she was doing and that he didn't have time to do anything more than hide her. But it still seemed, it's constantly confirming that he was whammied. He was there. And what Rashid says later is like if Morgan and the captain of the Wardens had to be put to death for LaFortier's murder, that might have caused a civil war right there.
I get all of those parts, but I don't recall Morgan literally just waking up there with Lucio, and it just adds more questions. So I guess I'm gonna have to read that part again after. But yeah, so interesting. I'm gonna look into it because like I thought he just either stumbled into it or was woken up by whatever was going on. Not like he was there kind of as a zombie as well.
Yeah, and when Harry says it too, he's because you already knew who killed LaFortier. She was standing there when you woke up in his chambers. You saw who did it. You wanted to protect her.
Yeah,
interesting.
So he definitely got whammied, but something you can't go against your nature that much. So Anastasia being in danger, that might have broken off most of it.
I see. So it's very interesting what you and EG are saying, but you know what I have to say about that? The end is nigh.
Is it though? Because we went off on a tangent. The end is never nigh.
I know, but it's how Peabody responds to the evidence and then interrupts Dresden being on a roll. And I like it too because every time Dresden gets one up on the senior council and he starts to like stick it to the Merlin or somebody, he's like, "Oh, I have so fucked up so hard right now." And then Peabody throws down some Mordite, some weaponized Mordite and runs. So
Mordite infused Mist Fiend
Yes.
is the
And-
technical term for it.
A large room of several hundred wizards all doing things that are perfectly normal because they're not combat trained and turning on lights and dying in the dozens.
Well, and to be fair though, like Harry does it, he's learned that lesson the hard way himself, right?
Yeah.
Because he does it in like Proven Guilty and a few other places where his immediate first reaction is to summon light, and then he's like, wait a minute, this might not be the smartest thing to do. So then he knows they're going to do it because he's done it, you know. So it's one of those things that I picked up in these previous books where it's like, that shit's going to come back later because you do it too. So he calls out not to do it, and then you get the whole for some reason Harry doesn't die, and then the Merlin is talking to everybody at the speed of thought.
Which
And-
is another thing of how important bureaucracy is and organization, and that counteracting the entropy of chaos of organization right now within like
Sure.
a few seconds.
You gotcha. Whatever you say, boss. So I like that Harry figures it out partway just because the Merlin is talking into his bad ear. Like he's talking into his bandaged ear, and he's like, "How are you?" Oh, because you're the Merlin, of course.
It's
And
in
then
my head.
just and just the whole sequence is like, you know, please nobody turn on the lights, please would you do this, also you two senior wizards, if you would just box him in over here so I don't get disintegrated, that would be lovely.
Mhm.
And Dresden, if you're not too busy, could you go fucking kill Peabody for me, you know?
And then Mary Chase throughout Edinburgh, and the end is nigh. The end is nigh.
And freezing all the junior wardens because it is not difficult to bend them to his will, not nearly as difficult anyway.
And they weren't nearly as important as the rest of the older crew that were actually guarding the important stuff happening.
True.
Also, they got to play cards.
Right. Yeah, some really good lawful evil stuff going on too, because at one point, you know, Peabody runs up and says, "Help, Dresden's trying to kill me," and the wardens bear down on Dresden, and then he sneaks up on the one chick and like cuts her thigh, and arterial bleed and everything like that. So Dresden does the good guy thing and stops to put on a tourniquet, and somehow Lucio is hobbled up behind him and, you know, finishes tying it off. Dresden chases Peabody through a tear in space-time into the Never Never and barely makes it there. Peabody starts to overpower and almost kills him, and Morgan saves the day because Morgan is awesome and he's lawful good and he's totally, you know, been the good guy the whole time. So,
And he kills him with a gun.
which he also, how did he do that? And how did he run so fast? And
How did he run so fast? That's a good question, but he took Lucio's gun.
I know, I'm just playing the
Someone
part.
came up with the idea that he used his death curse to make himself move.
Ah.
That's a good idea.
Ooh, I like it.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's a
I
good
mean,
one.
effectively, either way he did, right? Like,
Well,
he
yeah,
poured-
either way, he killed himself.
he poured his all into making sure that he didn't get away, and then after this, let him tell everybody that I did it. You know, it's okay for them to pin it on me.
There are also those adrenaline feats too. And though the death curse is most dramatic and most awesome,
I like the death curse because it also
I like the death
stops
curse.
Anastasia from needing to behead him.
Right, but I mean, okay, so I like the death curse thing because it's new and compelling, and that's the world, and we're at it. But not everything needs to be magic. So
right.
somebody
So
can
the
just be
adrenaline
Morgan
thing.
being a fucking badass, and he fucking got the job done because that's Morgan. He's too stubborn to die while the job isn't done.
Mhm.
So,
And
yeah.
then this is when he gets all soft and says, "I didn't tell anyone about Molly, and the reason I ran to you is because I knew you'd know what it felt like to be an innocent man hounded by the wardens."
and I'm not crying, you're crying. So yeah, and this is kind of where Harry kind of figures out the whole thing about Lucio as well, right? Like
I mean, he kind of gets it, but then when he's in the infirmary for at least a week, Rashid comes and talks to him, and that's when they really get into it because Rashid is trying to find what is this core thing that's kind of hiding in Lucio's head, and Rashid needs to figure out that Lucio is the one who actually killed Lafortier, and everything's getting undone.
And then Harry figures out why nobody used magic at the time, because in order to use magic to kill somebody, you really have to truly, deep down in your soul, believe it. and nobody did because they were mind fucked. So
Well, yeah, Lafortier couldn't do it because, I mean, even he wasn't mind fucked, but he couldn't,
He was
attack
shocked.
2 wardens like that, and he was caught off guard. Morgan could never use magic against the senior council member, and Lucio was literally under a haze.
Yeah.
Right.
And she wouldn't do it because she knew it was wrong.
That too.
Right.
So, happy endings all around.
It's so good. And I mean, so I know we're way over time, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about too was the Black Council gambit, right? So like obviously in addition to talking to Rashid, he also talks to Ebenezer. They have their conversation about the Grey Council and how, there's people going around, and then Harry starts to list things off, kind of like what their conversation with Rashid was. Like somebody's doing these things, somebody's teaching somebody how to do black magic and werewolves and all this other stuff. And he's like, I think there's a Black Council. And Ebenezer's like, huh, kind of a catchy name, like, why didn't we think of that? Oh, wait, we totally didn't. We've got a Grey Council. You should join us, and then it turns into like, oh, it's we now. Is it Haas? So, but the whole gambit, right, is to trigger a civil war. Like that's what it keeps going back to.
Yeah.
If Lucio and Morgan had been caught and put to death, like the plan was, civil war. If Morgan gets away with it, if he had been like, if Peabody or the Black Council just in general, because there were multiple operatives in this case, right? Madeline had some kind of direct connection somewhere. If maybe it was to Peabody, but she was at least directly connected. Binder was a patsy, to Madeline, and there were other catspaws and whatnot. But like if they had managed to sneak up on Harry and kill them on the island and then didn't have Morgan's body, Morgan could have been just this boogeyman out there the entire time, is one of the things that Harry starts to put together. And so basically this whole gambit is another death knell for the White Council, that the war should have probably finished them off, but maybe it's not. Maybe this was always the plan, but at the very least, if there's a civil war at the same time, you're barely holding your own, then you're definitely screwed.
Also, they killed Lafortier in order to get their own person in place, which was
they got the
Roberto
consolation
Christos.
prize at a minimum.
Yeah,
right. And this is something that we see multiple times when we start dealing with Mab and some of the other higher ups as well, right? The other big bads, when they do a gambit, they're going to make sure they win something. Yeah. And so the Black Council's like, worst case scenario, we lose Peabody, we get somebody else on the council, and we sowed a bunch of distrust and discord and all this other stuff, right? And that's basically what happens. Like it was the worst case for the Black Council, but it's still really bad for the good guys because Christos is on the council now, and there's nothing they can do about it, at least in the short term.
Well, they can leave him alone on a stage with a vampire.
Yeah, but I mean, ooh, scary. She's on the same side as Christos. Maybe they don't know, but
And they're not going to endanger anyone else, though.
That's fair, So let the two bad guys talk about it while we go into the war room and do war room things. So
then there's a little bit of a conversation with Murphy as he's back in Chicago, kind of just talking about everything that happened, Morgan and a little bit of Lucio, and then trying to clean up the mess that Morgan made of the bed. Lucio shows up and they have a conversation.
Also, still not crying. See, this is why Andreas needed to be here, so he could tell us that their love will go on and blah, blah, whatever. No, yeah, it's just...
You're in denial.
At this point, it's also creepy and weird, so that doesn't help. It's like her will was not her own, and she didn't want it. And they discussed in multiple ways that there might have been a teeny tiny part of her body, or mind or whatever, that was into the idea. And that's the only thing that even led a foundation for all the other nonsense that happened. But because she was in a younger body, she was able to be manipulated to a larger degree than the senior council members would have been, or she would have been if that hadn't happened.
Yeah. And
so
even if without the manipulation, it would have happened anyway, she can't let it go on because she was pushed into it.
Because she was pushed into it, but also the reason why she never got attached in the first place, right? Like she never got attached to Morgan or anybody else because of her position and job and so forth.
And that justification never goes away.
Right. Yeah. So, but it's also a huge, reading it the first time, it's such a huge, great throwback to Deadbeat. You know, because it's like, yeah, okay, cool. You're the hot shot badass captain of the Wardens. You get this nice new hot body, so you've got kind of a new lease on life, right? We still don't know how that's going to work, but theoretically, she gets another like 300 years because by virtue of manipulating magical forces will increase this body's longevity, even though her other one is already, you know, somewhat of an advanced age. So you've got that, right? You've got a little bit of the taste that something's a little different here because she doesn't have the same metaphysical mass necessary to create the swords. So we already knew something was going on because she talks about that. I want to say it's in Small Favor, right? She discusses why he never got a sword. Great little foreshadow that, hey, guess what? Lucio's not just Lucio just because she's the same mind in another body, right? And then here you get something else that it's like, oh, guess what? You know, I set this up 5 books ago that she's in a younger body, so now she can get mind manipulated like nobody's business. And I don't know how much of that was happy happenstance, but it's just such a great tie-in to something that happened so many books ago, you know.
And the line when Harry and Rashid are talking about, it's like, it's easy to worry about a friend when they start foaming at the mouth. It's hard to get suspicious when they suddenly become happy.
Right. And yeah.
Yeah.
What you just said, Justin, actually makes me think of something. I hope it's not way too off topic, but the pliability of the young mind, I know we've kind of beaten into the ground, but I wonder if Ancient Mai is that way not just because of the troped character type, but specifically to provide the contrast of being ancient and set in her ways. Because she absolutely is set in her ways, and she absolutely is the oldest wizard. By definition, she has the title Ancient. So I wonder if her function in that story is to also show the problems with being too resistant to new ideas. Well, of course, maybe that's reading into it again, but it definitely does provide that contrast between a very young wizard like Anastasia to very old Ancient Mai.
Look, if you're going to keep calling her Anastasia, I'm just going to say Stacy every time. I mean, that's seriously.
Lucio. Pizza. Anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, it's. I don't know if there's enough to latch onto to carry the conversation one way or another. I think it's a good idea. You know, maybe she didn't get manipulated. Maybe it was even easier for her, right? Because she is such a hard case. Like, all you have to do is make sure she just never opens up to any new ideas ever, you know, or something like that. But I mean, because it's like, yes, okay, she's ancient, she's stubborn, blah, it's a trope, but she's hundreds of years old and she's a mage. She can't be so rigid to never learn new things. Like,
you may not learning new things, but accepting new structures of power.
Right.
And all Peabody needs is for her to be predictable.
Fair.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's fair.
She resists one thing, but is completely can be manipulated. She was of all the wizards there, she was the least ally of Harry on Demon Reach.
Right.
But yeah, this was a bit of a throwback. We are at the
pretty much.
Was there anything after that, or is it just going to the?
Is the last scene
Thomas.
Conversation with Thomas?
Thomas, okay.
Right. Which he's now trying to handle everything that happened and not doing it so well.
No, he's doing fine. He's just doing it the White Court way, right?
And technically, the last scene is when Harry seals Andy's fate by bringing him Butters.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a great ending in so many other ways, but when you put it like that, I sort of hate it. I mean, Butterson's that.
Don't join the dark side. Don't see it from EG's point of view. So Butters is magical Batman.
Correct point of view.
You have to live with it. So
if he had stayed magical Batman, perfectly fine.
Yeah.
If his shtick was just like, oh, I'm gonna be like, use and as stupid as it is. If he had just been like, I'm going to use my inventive ways to make these little gadgets and stuff, fine. But once he became an asshole and then got a lightsaber, screw that noise.
He became an asshole because he stands up to Harry just like everybody else?
Listen, you can stand up to Harry all you want. Harry is an idiot who deserves to be smacked in the mouth plenty. That particular instance was, well, we'll get into it when we go to Skin Game. That particular instance was unnecessary.
This episode is long enough, or those episodes are going to be long enough. We will. Okay. To talk about Thomas, because it's going to directly relate to changes. He's deciding everyone is food, and he's talking like that they're just everyone's food. All humans are food. And Harry says, and what does Justine think about it? And Thomas is still hurting over that.
Right. Yeah. Justine thinks this conversation is over, and I've got to go do some brooding and pouting now. Thank you very much.
And then Harry is just like, I'm going to zap the radios, and the brotherly tenderness is still there of, yeah, that was a funny prank.
Yeah, the fist bump and the smirk. So, yeah.
Yeah, the best way to read that is just that Shag Nasty wasn't as much as a victor as he thought. Because immediately after this, even in changes, I guess it's even less of a reset button than I thought earlier today. That is, it's not
goes
really
right back to being Thomas.
He goes right back to being Thomas. Yeah, it's just without a lot of the baggage of his Tomas identity. So he doesn't have that anymore. You drop that.
He has some of the baggage there. It's just he's now it swung too far the other way.
Right.
Well, I mean, Thomas even says it in that book. I mean, if you had told me what the deal was, I would have been here sooner. Like, he's very clearly not just a distant asshole. He's
right.
He's ready to hat up and save his niece in a second.
Right. And some of that's a little disappointing, but I think we just haven't had all the opportunities to play that out, right? I think we're still going to get some of that in the early parts of peace talks, or at least hinted at, because you see some of it in Ghost Story, right? That Thomas is still dealing with this in, White Court ways, but it's still being dealt with, and he just comes across as like a complete hollowed out shell here. But yeah, he does in changes. He almost does go back to just being the Thomas that we know. We don't
get to see him brooding as much in changes because there's too much to worry about. But when he goes, how he is in Cold Days, that's Thomas of old. He's balanced. He has Justine. He's still a vampire. He accepts all of this, and he's handling it as one whole person.
Sure.
I mean, I didn't really see much difference from him in changes. He was joking and talking about who he was going to be.
We don't get to see him brooding his fate.
There was that one scene in we're going to get to the one scene in Ghost Story, right, where Harry pokes in on what Thomas is doing, and Justine kisses another lady.
Yeah, and Harry's like, yeah, he'll be fine. He's good.
Well, that's another thing. I mean, right there so he immediately hats up and changes. Ghost Story, he's in a complete depression mode about his brother dying. Like, he's not a hard ass, shell of a vampire that's just like giving up on life.
Right.
Yeah, it is a bit.
Damaged a little bit right now.
So this is just another function of Harry just wandering around, and whoever he touches in his life gets a little bit better, a little bit more healed, except those who aren't like burned to cinders or killed.
Yeah, except those who die violent, terrible deaths.
Or your life is just a little bit better, or you're kidnapped by the Fae. Anyone
to die a violent death later on.
To die a violent death later. And then the gaming scene.
Last scene of that's okay. D&D, cool.
Right.
I believe it was Arcanos.
Yes.
Lead.
Oh, whatever. They're all D&D.
Brought to you by Evil Hat Games. This episode brought to you by Evil Hat Games.
And then
I really don't think it is.
No, it isn't. It isn't. And that's it.
I mean, if they gave us money, it would be.
But they didn't.
Give us money.
$12,000 each. I'm spending my $12,000 on.
That's not right, man. We gave them money that one time. Just kidding. So
yeah, I mean, probably a little bit.
I bought the game. Does that count? I bought it secondhand, though. I guess it doesn't count.
Seriously, Ben. Seriously, man.
Well, Dresden Files podcast, I guess, is that
yes, we avoided a part 3. I'm very
hooray! Dresden Files podcast.
3 parts.
We could have easily made this 3 parts, but we've only made it 2 by making a super long episode. Yeah. Hooray! 2 extra length episodes for your enjoyment of the Dresden Files podcast. Thank you for listening in. This has been a wonderful presentation of the Broken Jars Network. Listen to our other productions, including the Moribund High Fantasy, which is about being moribund, but listen to the stuff in the archives. It's still a wonderful listen. We have Sim Talk, which is a very serious and professional podcast about professional simulations, bringing in guests from all over the industry of industrial simulations. We also have Office something. Great Scott about The Office.
Office something.
I was going to say Office Space, but I was like, Great Scott, which is a podcast about The Office, which is also almost over, only because there's only so many episodes of The Office to look at, and so many.
Why they need to change The Simpsons?
Oh, they.
I was gonna say, wait a minute, it's not over.
Then The Simpsons. It's just going to be an infinite podcast. They'll retire at the age of 80. Well, okay, I guess it's possible. And then that's pretty.
We have to bring in that sweet, sweet evil hat money.
The Dresden Files podcast, a board game brought to you by Evil Hat Productions. You get our official merch. Do you have merch?
Yes, we'll sell them whatever they want.
Okay. I've got a